Но то, что вот этот Алеша известно Болгарии всей.
I was just reading some William Blake recently. Later this week, I'm going to put up a video, a long video on William Blake's Book of Thel. I'll be reading it. I'll be analyzing it. I'll be talking about the various criticism surrounding it. So maybe you guys could, maybe it'll be up by like Sunday or so. But here, so I was just reading some Blake, and it just reminded me of how he was writing mid to late 1700s, early 1800s. John Donne, I think, was like the first like truly like great poet in English. Overall, he's a better poet than William Shakespeare was. And like John Donne represented like a leap not only in terms of just technical ability, things like knowing how to like select like just the right word. Mark Twain called it the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug, right? And you saw that kind of like specificity in diction with John Donne, but you also saw just conceptually just leaps beyond the kind of English poetry that came before John Donne. So like before John Donne, generically religious poetry would be generically religious. John Donne conceptually, clearly had conflicts with God. Clearly had, in much of his poetry, almost like just like Catullus had like so many like playful sexual poems. What was it called? Like passer, which is the Latin for what kind of bird is passer? Passer. Anyway, like there would be like poems that are very sexual and playful, and kind of modern in many ways. And John Donne very much perfected that. Poems like The Flea, and I don't think you had like an actual conceptual leap in poetry really again until we get to William Blake. And also again when we get to Walt Whitman, right? That was probably the biggest conceptual leap. But when we get to William Blake, we not only get tons of like technical proficiency, tons of just like John Donne would always like rub up against meter and violate meter and confound people that would try to do metrical readings of poetry. Like I remember like when I was really into meter before I even read. Before I ever read like Dan Schneider's essays. Dan Schneider has this like great essay on it's called Robinson Jeffers and the Metrical Fallacy. If you Google that by Dan Schneider, you'll find it. And he talks about meter as he tries to apply it to Robinson Jeffers. And he basically says that meter is a myth. It's a poor way of measuring rhythm. It leaves a lot out of the equation. It's also just innately subjective. And I remember like before reading that, I was like trying to like analyze like metrical feet and John Donne, and everything just seemed like a violation to me. Just technically conceptually, they both kind of push things. And just imagine this song, this poem, right? I believe this is the late 1700s. I forget, like 1780, could be like 1787. I think Book of Thel is like 1787, 88, 89. Near contemporaneous with Tyriel, I think. Anyway, so just imagine like, so we're going to, the late 1700s, right? This like imagine what people could be thinking then. Imagine what you would take to be the complexity or the lack of complexity in their thoughts. And just imagine that, somebody with that kind of stereotype that you have in your head, somebody wrote this. So let's just read it once, and then I'll go over some of the more interesting parts. So William Blake, a cradle song from Songs of Innocence. Sweet dreams form a shade over my lovely infant's head, sweet dreams of pleasant streams by happy, silent, moony beams. Sweet sleep with soft down, weave thy brows an infant crown. Sweet sleep, angel mild, hover over my happy child. Sweet smiles in the night, hover over my delight. Sweet smiles, mother smiles, all the livelong night beguiles. Sweet moans, dove-like sighs, chase not slumber from thy eyes. Sweet moans, sweeter smiles, all the dove-like moans beguiles. Sleep, sleep, happy child, all creation slept and smiled. Sleep, sleep, happy sleep, while over thee thy mother weep. Sweet babe, in thy face, holy image I can trace. Sweet babe, once like thee, thy maker lay and wept for me. Wept for me, for thee, for all, when he was an infant small. Thou his image ever see, heavenly face that smiles on thee, smiles on thee, on me, on all. Who became an infant small, infant smiles are his own smiles, heaven and earth to peace beguiles. The first time that I read this poem, well, maybe not the first time, but at some point reading this poem, I just got the sense that Songs of Innocence has, it has some very good poetry in there, but some of the worst poems in Songs of Innocence are just kind of like they're there to communicate something simple, right? Simple ideas, simple emotions, fine. But they do it in a way that is just kind of like very simplistic as well. And this is a poem that it takes some of the kind of like simplistic aspects of some of the like lesser poems in Songs of Innocence, and it uses them to like establish turning points and to establish contrasts and to do much more than what those other poems did. So at the beginning, like this line, right? Sweet dreams form a shade over my lovely infant's head. On the one hand, it's like, it's clearly, like a mother or a father just, it's kind of like, trying to protect a child. But like, are you implying that otherwise without these sweet dreams, there might be some kind of, disturbance, some kind of turbulence maybe in this household? Right. What is the nature of like starting a poem with this kind of like, almost like, little prayer? And it gets like very kind of sing-songy, but also kind of memorable, right? Sweet dreams of pleasant streams by happy, silent, moony beams, right? This is a very kind of childlike description, right? But it's bouncy like the beams, right? By happy, silent, moony beams. It's an immediately sort of arresting image, and it fits nicely with the kind of lullaby-esque kind of feel of the poem so far. But watch what happens as this goes on. Sweet sleep with soft down, weave thy brows an infant crown. Sweet sleep, angel mild, hover over my happy child. So this is more kind of generically descriptive, kind of more regular, like Songs of Innocence. But here you have a turning point in the third stanza. Sweet smiles in the night hover over my delight. Sweet smiles, mother smiles, all the livelong night beguiles. And this is in some ways, such a mysterious stanza. Sweet smiles in the night hover over my delight. So she seems to be kind of like addressing almost her own smiles, right? Because then she says sweet smiles, mother smiles, right? So she goes from kind of like almost imagining maybe some of the smiling and some of the appearance of the child to really fixating on her kind of maybe hunched over and really, trying to, like smile, I guess, in this kind of way, this infant. Sweet smiles, mother smiles, all the livelong night beguiles. And I mean, this line, right? It could mean so many different things. And before you even get to this like part of the line, you have to like decide how you're going to split up this sentence, right? So we have sweet smiles, mother smiles, comma, and as a completely disconnected thought, you could have all the livelong night beguiles, right? So this night, right? She's hovering over her child. And she's characterizing it as a live-long night, right? Perhaps, maybe the night is too long, or maybe just feels long, or maybe she's like in the midst of a night. So you could read it as all the live-long night beguiles, right? Everything, is sort of being made mysterious. Maybe some information is being taken away, right? Like in this kind of context, like if you think about how you could interpret beguiles, right? You're thinking of like subterfuge. I'm guessing like in that way, right? And so we go from thinking about the child to this kind of strange, fixation on the mother fixating on herself, her own smiles. And this line that is kind of like quite unlike anything that came before and is going to serve as a fulcrum. And just watch how this thing, which is kind of like an amplification, watch how this amplification is amplified yet again. Sweet moans, dove-like sighs, chase not slumber from thy eyes. Sweet moans, sweeter smiles, all the dove-like moans beguiles. So you could read this as sweet moans, dove-like sighs, chase not slumber, meaning as the child is in its crib or whatever, wherever the child is in. I'm not sure what kind of cribs they had in his day. As the child is sort of, lying there, as he moans, right, as he sighs, hopefully that doesn't agitate him, right? That doesn't force him to awake, right? I want him to continue just having these good dreams and resting there. That's one reading, but again, in a purely grammatical sense, just like here, you could split this up and have two separate, readings here. You could have two different readings here, right? This could be a reference back to the mother, right? This could be talking about, hey, I am watching you, right? I am fixating on my smiles. And now this has amplified to moans and dove-like sighs. And I hope that as I smile and fixate on this and moan and give you these dove-like sighs, I hope that your slumber, right, is not interrupted by my sounds. Sweet moans, sweeter smiles. You know that this is a reading that makes sense because the sweet smiles, even if this, like, yeah, this could be referring also to the smiles of the child, but this sweeter smile, right, could be referring back to the mother, right? We already said mother smiles, right? Sweet smiles. It's already part of the interpretation, right? It's already implicit there. And all the dove-like moans beguiles, right? Like, this definitely is like an amplification, right? You get the sense that, I don't want to do like this kind of stereotypical, like, I don't want to talk about like a reading of like sexual abuse. Like, it doesn't have to, like, this could just be conceptually, right? Conceptually, something that is inappropriate, some kind of inappropriate relationship, right? We don't have to take these kinds of other positions which they're not really relevant to what we're talking about. But we have an amplification in this stanza, right? Sweet moans, sweeter smiles, all the dove-like moans beguiles, right? Like, think about the fact that these two stanzas, they don't provide that much more in like discrete, kind of like plot, units of meaning, right? It's still the same thing. It's still the mother like hovering over the the crib or whatever, riding on this fulcrum, providing like another amplification, and still kind of focusing on her smiles, right? Sleep, sleep, happy child, all creation slept and smiled. Sleep, sleep, happy sleep, while over thee thy mother weep. Right? So another turning point, right? So far we have the mother fixating on the child, on her own, gesticulations, her own, physical expressions. We have strange terminology that suggests, something, inappropriate, vaguely speaking, going on. We have an amplification of this, and suddenly we have, this has to be read as like, some other kind of fulcrum, right? To the extent that, all, good poems have probably any number of fulcrums, and this is one. Now we have her as actually weeping, right? And we don't know if she's crying out of happiness. We don't know if she's crying out of sadness, but she's weeping, right? So we have a turn, right? Something that's vaguely inappropriate to something that there is perhaps like that is explained by a deeper sadness in the household. So let's see what she's crying about. Sweet babe, in thy face, holy image I can trace. Sweet babe, once like thee, thy maker lay and wept for me. Wept for me, for thee, for all, when he was an infant small. Thou his image ever see, heavenly face that smiles on thee. Smiles on thee, on me, on all, who became an infant small. Infant smiles are his own smiles, heaven to earth, to peace beguiles. And what I find just so interesting about these final stanzas is, so this is the, when Blake had, religious poetry and references to, you don't want to necessarily read all the time that this is just Jesus, right? I mean, he was Christian, yes, but, he has enough going on where these could be like Jesus-like figures, right? This is just not necessarily, let's say, the Jesus of the Bible, and especially not the Jesus of tradition, but the Jesus as he sees him in his like idealization, right? Like, isn't it so interesting how here's a mother that's kind of like inappropriately in some way like hovering over her child and fixating on her expressions and her weeping. Here you have this pivot back to the child, and every single time that indirectly, let's call this Jesus figure, infant, is described, it's exactly kind of like the kinds of things that have been being described about her own infant, right? Like if you kind of view this more broadly as like like Blake, he was like in his work like building this religion, he was he was trying to like build on Christianity with his own mythology, and the way that he would do that is he would really try to personalize it, right? He would say that there needs to be like a deeper kind of equality between the sexes, between the races, right? And the way that he does it actually in his work is when we talk about this infant, right? Let us do the same thing for the infant Jesus, right? We will find this kind of parity by, dedicating the same number of stanzas, by essentially treating these children, in the same way. And we'll do it while also, technically, building on these fulcrums, having these like layers of meaning that are much harder to pin down. Like, again, all the livelong night beguiles, something excessive there, something mysterious, some kind of information being chipped away, something is being kept in the shadows. We have amplifications, and then we just have this wonderful pivot that mirrors like the pivot just structurally of all of the songs of Innocence, but just does like it together so much more with it. Really, one of my favorite William Blake poems. Let's see how we're doing on comments. Oh, I guess people are not as interested in this stuff, huh? Okay, so that was William Blake here. Let's see what's happening here. Hopefully we get a flood soon. Anyway, okay, so that was a Cradle song. This one I think is from Songs of Experience. And I think the best of Songs of Experience are better than the best of Songs of Innocence. And here's just such a technically well done, just fucking tightly constructed poem, that, you know, like when I was talking with John Donne before, you know, kind of like always having the right word, just always being able, you know, just being able to be concise, being able to say exactly what you have to say, and then promptly moving on to the next like unit of meaning. He does that very well, but also just conceptually, you know, I don't think that John Donne would have been able to write this kind of poem conceptually, right? I don't think that, I don't want to say that these thoughts weren't in the ether. I think they were probably in the culture, but I don't know if people had the vocabulary to jump on it, to describe it, to really understand it structurally. I mean, in some ways you could see this like, it's very Blake-esque, but it's also, you know, John Donne perfected in some ways. A Poison Tree by William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles, and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. So, I mean, the first stanza is like, it's just a perfect encapsulation. And what is that technique that Nietzsche uses to write, like epigrammatic style? This is like a very epigrammatic stanza, right? I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. This is typically what happens, right? Imagine all the times that you hold in your anger, if you ever do hold in your anger. And hold it in a way where you don't discuss it. You don't try to at least understand it, get to the bottom of it. Versus when you actually put it out there, and even especially if you have a conversation with the person that made you angry, right? That has such a soothing effect upon you, especially if there's, maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe there is, a new piece of information here. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow. Think about how pleasant it is, right, to hold a grudge, right? Think about how people sometimes love to hold a grudge, right? Because a grudge provides energy, right? Like if you can use your anger for some kind of constructive means, a grudge is helpful to you, right? You could always have this person in your mind that you fantasize about, either hurting in some way or like getting one over, right? It's a strategy, right? It's a consuming strategy. It's not a healthy one. Like you could get similar, if not better results using other kinds of strategies, but it's a quick, sloppy, quick fix sort of thing. So people do it. So William Blake, in this kind of epigrammatic fashion, in 4 lines, he explains like the nature of anger so well, right? But so far it's only an introduction. He builds on this notion of anger. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles, right? If you hold a grudge, if you hold a hatred, if you hold wrath, and if you don't care to let it go, you will ultimately do this thing. You will water it with fears. You will reach down into your personal fears, right? And you will apply those fears to this, situation, to this hate, right? You're going to project your fears on it, right? It's going to, that's one of the reasons why it's why hatred is so damaging in so many ways, right? It taps into so many other parts of you that you shouldn't really be giving into. You will be giving into your fears by projecting them in this way, and by growing this thing and also growing your fears. Night and morning with my tears, just imagine this image of just being just hunched over, and your wrath is just so, it just makes you on some level so happy that you're willing to be there, projecting your fears upon it. Night and morning, putting your tears on it, crying, weeping over this thing. You want it so much. And I stunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. Right. And that's the thing. Like this wrath, like you can fan the flames by, applying smiles to the situation, by not killing off your opponent or the person you have a grudge against, or the idea you have a grudge against, or the axe you have to grind. Like it's against your interest to completely kill it off, right? You want to, because then it becomes boring on one hand. You want to sun it with your smiles, right? You want to give it life. You want to let it go on. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright. Because isn't that what anger feels like? Like when you're really in a fucking rage that makes you feel so good. You must know what I'm talking about. A rage that makes you feel so good, right? It's an apple bright, right? It's this beautiful fucking idealized, engineered, overgrown, project that you've like put so much, perhaps some of your good self went into it. Maybe it led to some positive outcomes in your life, but you've put so much of your worst self into this thing, and it became this like, this like stereotypical, overgrown apple. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine. Right? He's envious of this apple. He's envious of this thing that is destroying you. Maybe this apple bright is, I don't know. Maybe use your hatred. Like I've used hatred before to like fund my writing. Like you see some of the people that I've written about, people that I don't respect, people that I think are just net negatives. Their existences are net drains on the world. So I put them into my essays, I put them into my books, and that's the apple bright, right? People see it, right? It's the product of so much anger. But that's the apple bright, right? And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. That's a critical part. Not only is it this, thing that is easily coveted, right? He is a person that covets, right? He knew that it was mine because it belongs to me, right? Because I created this thing. I made this apple. He knew that it was mine. And this is like a Poetry Foundation, I think, for most of the Blake poems. They use like the original Blake punctuation, which I find very interesting in some ways. Like usually now the people would turn this into a comma, and he knew that it was mine, comma, and into my garden stole, right? But this leaves you with that thought, right? That period, right, as a hard pause, and he knew that it was mine. Right? Think about that. Think about the implications there. He knew that it was mine. Like this is the thing that's going to be critical. That's going to dictate his subsequent actions. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. Like what in other contexts, this could be like a cliched way of discussing nighttime. Like axes and stuff like that are a common sort of a thing in John Donne's poetry as well, but here like it works, it just works very nicely. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. You get the sense of the two lines, pre evening, dusk. That transition has happened. These two words, these two lines, the second line, by being in the language of 1700s poetry, idiomatic, right? This kind of imagery, exotic to us, which is a plus. It sort of made, I think, the poem even a little bit better as it aged. but was idiomatic then. The two combine pretty nicely in that regard. You see literally that transition occur, right? And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning, glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree, right? So this is ultimately the result, right? This is a poison tree, right? This is Blake discussing hatred, right? He doesn't want to give into hatred. But I mean, these are the kinds of lines that, this is how Sigmund Freud might discuss, how Sigmund Freud might discuss hatred a century later, right? What Jungians might discuss a century and a half later, would we discuss 2 centuries later, right? And Joel and I are going to do an artifact at the end of this month on the what is it, the Leonard Shlain book, Art and Physics, and the central argument in that book is every great artist is able to see things. He makes the scientific argument that in the kind of physics sense, physical sense, light sense, visual sense, that later science would prove to be this is how the world actually is. And something like poetry, right? Not the visual arts, right? We can't really talk about physics and stuff like that all that much in writing, but in poetry specifically, right? We can talk about psychological insights, right? We could say, hey, this is the kind of thing that Sigmund Freud would ultimately be changed by, prompted by, given a new kind of way of thinking about the world. So when Dan Schneider and I say stuff like art has such a profound impact on the world, but it's not felt right away, this is how it happens, right? This is William Blake writing A Poison Tree, and an army of scientists at some point being influenced by this idea scientifically transfers into the culture. It influences directly or indirectly, maybe through a filtered form. It influences Freud and the Jungians and us today. Maybe I already knew a lot of this before even coming to this. Maybe that was the indirect influence. But the fact is, William Blake saw something that would not get codified anywhere else until half a century later, a century later, 2 centuries later. So you could use the Leonard Shlain art and physics argument in literature, right, to specifically make these kinds of claims about poetry. It's also topical. I feel like we could make some relevant political connections here. The Little Black Boy, I think that's also Songs of Experience. My mother bore me in the southern wild, and I am black, but oh, my soul is white. White as an angel is the English child, but I am black, as if bereaved of light. My mother taught me underneath a tree, and sitting down before the heat of day, she took me in her lap and kissed me, and pointing to the east began to say, look on the rising sun, there God does live and gives his light and gives his heat away. And flowers and trees and beasts and men receive comfort and morning joy in the noonday. And we are put on earth a little space, that we may learn to bear the beams of love, and these black bodies and the sunburnt face is but a cloud, and like a shady grove. For when our souls have learned the heat to bear, the cloud will vanish, we shall hear his voice, saying, come out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent like lambs rejoice. Thus did my mother say and kissed me, and thus I say to little English boy, when I from black and he from white cloud free, and round the tent of God like lambs we joy, I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear, to lean in joy upon our Father's knee. And then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair, and be like him, and he will then love me. Just such modern sensibilities in this poem. Here, it seems as if Blake is beginning, so first Blake was He was very much against slavery. He was, in every modern sense of the word, like a progressive, I guess. You have at the beginning, though, something that's like a cliche at the time, right? I am black, but oh, my soul is white. This like sort of disconnect between the two, that the black is the bad thing and the white is the good thing. Often this had racial overtones and undertones when race was introduced into it. Other times it was just like classically Europe had negative associations with the color black. The soul, like a white soul was considered something positive. It wasn't all racial, but it seems to start with this kind of cliched image. And the interesting thing about the poem is it just completely builds upon this just to reverse it, right? So white as an angel is an English child, but I am black as if breathed of light. Another kind of cliche here, but here you have this arresting image, right? I am black as if bereaved of light, right? Bereaved literally means like, you are mourning because someone was taken away from you. Here it's as if like you were bereaved of that, right? It's a very intense word to use here. It's a very visible, memorable, good, nice word. It's kind of, again, that John Donne perfection, right word at the right time. That ad minimum is just kind of like an amplification of what came before. So the higher that he's setting this up, like the steeper the fall that we're ultimately going to get. My mother taught me underneath a tree and sitting down beneath the heat of day. Okay, so narrative wise, let's see. So here again, you have a pivot to God. What can God, allow you to have, right? And ultimately, Blake, says in this world where like the chimney sweeper poems, he's constantly making fun, like he's being sarcastic about this idea that chimney sweepers are supposed to be like perfectly content with their lot. And the mother, she's sort of taking that chimney sweeper perspective when she says, we are put on earth a little space, right? Don't take up too much space. Don't demand too much. This is your niche. Try to fill it. Try to do the best that you can, and don't try to necessarily do more than that. Also, perhaps don't do less than that either. But, there is this kind of like, emphasis on smallness, that we may learn to bear the beams of love, and these black bodies and the sunburned face is but a cloud and like a shady grove. So here you have this like direct antagonism and attack of like their own physical color, right? Which is like, not that I necessarily condone the quality of this book, but this is very Toni Morrison-esque, The Bluest Eye, Black Self-Hatred, Talib Kweli, Why Do We Listen to the Law of the Bluest Eye, Self-Hatred, and it's an amplification here. For when our souls have learned the heat to bear, the clouds will vanish and hear his voice, saying, come on out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent like lambs rejoice. More religious imagery. Thus did my mother say and kiss me, and thus I to little English boy. So here you have like, again, the original punctuation, and some editions add words here, some don't. Here it has this interesting like sort of like, we are talking about the concepts of white cloud, we are talking the concepts of black, right? When I from black and he from white cloud free, right? We're not going to have any other additional words there. And around the tent of God, like lambs we joy, I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear. So this is like the ultimate amplification, right? We had little by little this getting kind of steeper and steeper, and kind of like what these black this black child and this black mother were saying about themselves. And it ends with, and I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and he will then love me, right? So again, just like my Ahmed Arbery video from a few months back, even then, right, whether or he's making fun of this idea or not, there's this special expectation placed upon black people, right? Black people are expected to stand there and to just kind of like be the ones that transcend, right? Like he's going to be the one that strokes the silver hair. he's going to be the one that has to become like someone that, in some ways is his adversary, in some ways has an unequal relationship with him. This is, perhaps like I am like poorly misreading this. I don't think I am, given what I know about him contextually, and also the ways that his poems are very sarcastic and do build in this way, and do set up these structures just to sort of topple them. This to me sounds like something that Blake would write and think. I am projecting out an image of how people view blackness and whiteness, right? And by including these amplifications, right, I'm going to maybe like make you think otherwise, right? Should we be the ones that are constantly making this expectation that black people are the ones that transcend, that they are the ones that rise above their station, that they are the ones that grin and bear it and be okay with something that I would never accept for myself, right? So just topically, I thought this was an interesting poem to get at. I've sometimes wondered whether I am being too charitable in that regard, whether like the sarcasm is too much like imbuing from previous poems that I know this is a technique, or whether like Blake was simply like a product of his times in that way. But I've simply chosen to always read this in the past as something that generally was a critique of these kinds of black-white relations, and specifically like black-white, self-definitions. Right? This is like exactly what modern-day artists might sort of get at. And again, going back to the idea of do artists see ahead of others? The answer is yes, right? And to the extent that we could say that Blake here was not a product of his time, but looking ahead of and from his time, I think that's doable. So to continue with the theme of William Blake, this is probably his most famous poem. I don't know if I'll have too much to say about it, but just something that I reread, and if it's like so stuck in your memory that this does nothing for you, oh well. But I think any kind of rereading, you'll probably notice something a little different, especially if you haven't heard it in a while. The Tyger. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dared deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, in what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So just recently rereading again, I just noticed this line and thought about it quite a bit. It just stuck with me over the last couple of weeks. In the forests of the night, right? Like, think of how the image you want people to associate if you're writing the word night, and you want to maybe darken it in some way. One way you could darken it is you could add color to it, but that's kind of cliched and it comes across as kind of weak. Blake said, you know what, I'm going to say in the forests of the night, right? So imagine a night as an abstract kind of space, and then just an abstracted forest in that night, right? You just have, you're just piling one on the other in that regard. And I mean, it sticks with you, right? Like, think about the order of the words, right? In the forests of the night. Think about like how it just kind of makes you strain a little bit to think about how to fit it grammatically, how to make sense of it. But like, the point is, you can make sense of it. It's not, it's not hard to do so, right? So it's not straining, right? The thing that differentiates, a lot of good from bad poetry is, you could have like one poem that's naturally poetic in its effects, and then suddenly you have a poem that is straining, right? And this is an example of not straining. In the Force of the Night captures exactly what you want to say, and does so in a memorable fashion. So in With Distant Deeps or Skies, Burn the Fire of Thine Eyes. This is more kind of like, I consider many this is not like traditionally great writing in the sense that all these lines are individually memorable. You're not necessarily using that standard, but you have three stanzas that are like essentially it's a structural setup, right? Second stanza just builds on the first, and what children, what art could twist the sinews of that heart. So again, more kind of like sheer physicality, right? And the one hand, like, he never quite describes what the tiger ever looks like, right? This is the interesting part. He has three stanzas here just on the sheer physicality, but he focuses on the creation, and he never really explains the creation, right? The fire of thine eyes. I guess you could describe some tigers in that way. The sinews of thy heart. This is a clear a poeticism. This is just something that's kind of brought in, and you have no choice though to just keep imagining a tiger for three full stanzas. Even if the tiger is never actually described, the size is never described. Some coloration maybe, but it's all kind of left up to you. And for three stanzas, without ever describing that tiger, he's forcing you, by talking about the creation of this tiger, he's forcing you to imagine your own tiger. However he describes it, doesn't matter how, right? How you take it, but he's forcing you to do that on your own. And then finally, you have like this kind of I don't know if I would say a turn. It's more kind of like a summation, right? Like everything that came before, it gets condensed. Also, just interesting set of lines, like when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, right? Like, think about what that could refer to, right? That clearly could be rainfall. He could be, referring to like, the biblical like Noah myth. He could be talking about something abstract and far away. He could be talking about some future calamity. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, right? This is how he characterizes the creation of the universe, right? Also, right? Because he, like, literally that is what's happening, right? He is kind of talking about some sort of beginnings, right? Even if you accept like all the other interpretations that I just said, like clearly this part of the poem is about some sort of beginnings, right? You could plausibly say that this is discussing the creation of the world, and it ends like this, like after this like poetic framing. Did he smile his work to see, right? Because there's this possibility that Blake is saying that the tiger is too awesome in the 1800 sense of awesome, is too awesome, too awe-inspiring, for God to even smile upon, right? And this all comes to a head. Did he who made the lamb make thee, right? You don't need any fucking description of the tiger. Like, you all you need in this case is this broad ass stroke, right? This contrast. We're making a contrast to the lamb, right? The tiger is making a contrast to the lamb. Anything else? Nothing to talk about? Great, I could finish this then. Okay, so from Songs of Experience, A Little Boy Lost. So in this one, they actually use the kind of modernized Blake punctuation and sometimes even like words. And I mean, we'll get to it when we talk about that. So A Little Boy Lost. Naught loves another as itself, nor venerates another so, nor is it possible to thought a greater than itself to know. And Father, how can I love you or any of my brothers more? I love you like the little bird that picks up crumbs around the floor. The priest sat by and heard the child. In trembling zeal he seized his hair. He led him by his little coat, and all admired the priestly care. And standing on the altar high, lo, what a fiend is here, said he, one who sets reason up for a judge of our most holy mystery. The weeping child could not be heard, the weeping parents wept in vain. They stripped him to his little shirt, and bound him in an iron chain, and burned him in a holy place where many had been burned before. The weeping parents wept in vain. Are such things done on Albion's shore? So this is, I'll say outright, this is the weakest of the poems that we're discussing tonight. And I say this for a couple of reasons, and also like there's also some flat out really good things about the poem too. I mean, it's an interesting thought to start, right? Naught loves another as itself, nor venerates another so, nor is it possible to thought a greater than itself to know. And by the setup of the poem, though, Blake presents this as something that like in a normative light, right? This is in some way correct, right? This is what people ought to think. And you get a lot of payoff in the second stanza. And Father, how can I love you any of my brothers more? I love you like the little bird that picks crumbs around the door. This is such a modern like little image. This idea that we almost like Buddhist kind of like all-encompassing love, togetherness, oneness. I think sort of like Blake is getting at that here. But I love you like the little bird that picks up crumbs around the door. That's made, to rhyme. It's very kind of matter of fact. It's very, prosaic, but also kind of, sticks with you. And it's paired with, an interesting thought. Probably when you hear it, you would sort of quip with it, but also you would wonder like, well, what is it being set up for in the entirety of the poem? So let's move on. The priest sat by and heard the child. In trembling zeal, he seized his hair. So we know that the priest is not happy by this, right? There is something bad that's going to happen, right? This is, I guess, like in the first turning point. He led him by his little coat and all admired the priestly care. This is I mean, it's not a bad stanza. And all admired the priestly care is like this kind of sinister, kind of like sarcastic, like, he's being gentle when really he's about to do something bad. But it's also new, like, I guess I think of it as a little bit cliched, but I guess I'm only thinking that because this was kind of new. I can't off the top of my head think of this kind of, Blake-esque sarcasm before Blake. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, there is like some in Dunn, I guess, but it's a lot more fleshed out with Blake. But so we have like a turning point here, but it's not like so far. It's not like a turning point like this, or a turning point like this, right? Or a line like all the livelong night beguiles, all the dove-like moans beguiles. You structurally, grammatically not knowing whether this is referring to the mother or the infant's expressions, right? Which just adds so much, richness to it. Here, there's not too many ways to interpret this. This is a turning point that is kind of very, it's kind of wooden. And standing at the altar high, lo, what a fiend is here, said he. A kind of like generic insult against like the enemy of like Blake's conception of religion that he's establishing here. One who sets up reason up for judge of our most holy mystery. And it's interesting because like, I don't know, like it may be improper to call them villains, but some of like Blake's like prophetic books, like the, your reason, Urizen, I think it's pronounced your reason. He's kind of like an enemy. He's kind of like a foe, an adversary, an anti-hero at minimum in some way. And your reason, what he wants to do is he wants to control the universe by way of reason, right? By subjecting everything to reason. But here, priest, right, who's supposed to kind of like represent like what Blake thinks is wrong in the world. He is almost making a critique of the boy, that the boy is acting in a your reason sense, right? But we know that's also silly because he hasn't said anything bad, right? He simply thought about it, but I wouldn't really characterize this as a your reason-esque thought. But I mean, we know kind of where this is heading. Like, it's not gonna end very well. The weeping child could not be heard. The weeping parents wept in vain. They stripped him to his little shirt and bound him in an iron chain. So this is just straight up melodrama, right? Melodrama that's not, it's written well in the sense that it's kind of like sticks with you in a generic way. Like, they stripped him to his little shirt and bound him in an iron chain. Like, using, the kind of like almost sing-songy, stress unstressed here is it helps in that way. But I don't think it's enough for me to say that there is something sardonic going on here with Blake, because it doesn't seem like there is. And burn him in a holy place where many had been burned before. The weeping parents wept in vain. Are such things done on Albion's shore? So in the original Blake, the original manuscripts, this is not a question mark. This is a period. I think the period is more interesting meaning wise, but you're still left with something that, a poem that, every poem is fulcrums. The set of fulcrums here are not as, they're not as rich, right? They don't offer as much. The change that they create is not as interesting or as deep. You get this like metal drama in the end that kind of sags it down, and kind of like nothing of an ending. So, Songs of Experience. The Fly. Let's just do this one more, and that should be done. It for the Blake portion of tonight's stream. The Fly is a poem written by the English poet William Blake. It was published as part of his collection of Songs of Experience in 1794. Okay, so again, this is even pre-1800s thought, right? So this is the thought that was possible back then, right? And then you think of all the thought that might have been suppressed or never had a chance to truly come out. Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee? Or art not thou a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing, till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die. Well, first of all, just like wonderful use of enjambment. Like enjambment is supposed to, whether or not you actually pause when you physically read, as you've been noticing sometimes, I do pause on enjambment here at the end of the line, right? I pause on the enjambments when I read some poems. Some I sort of work through quickly. Some people are very like religious about it, like you have to pause an enjambment line, and others you should never pause. But there are many places where it makes sense to pause versus not, and here stronger pauses clearly make this better. Little fly, right? Image. Thy summer's play, image, discreet. My thoughtless hand, discreet, building up some kind of tension, right? Thoughtless hand, something's coming that's not very nice, has brushed away. A relief of tension. You had, just a few words across 4 lines, a set of images, a composite image. You did a lot in these 4 fucking lines. Am not I a fly like thee? So I find this interesting line because even in Blake's time, this was like a little bit of a generic observation. You saw this in like, Chinese mystics. You saw this in European poetry before Blake. People saying things all the time like, hey, we are animals like any other animal. Like, we should be humble. We should understand that. And that's fine, right? That's factually correct. But it always struck me as like missing the point, right? Missing the point. And Blake actually supplies us what ought to be the point in the next 2 lines. So, am not I a fly like thee? Or art not thou a man like me? So this is something new, right? People would be skeptics all the time about, making distinctions between animal and not animal. But you never really had all that often until like Blake's time and Whitman's time, this idea that it's not simply that we are low like animals, but you, an animal, are as high as I am, right? If you say you're as low as something else, you could justify all manner of, bad behavior, right? I'm just an animal. This is fine. If this is the standard, or art not thou a man like me, that completely, is an inversion. This is an inversion of like, the kinds of this, like, am I not a fly like thee thought that was like more prevalent during Blake's time. So again, going back to the Leonard Shlain thing, art and physics, artists see ahead in terms of, making like discoveries in physics before scientists do. You could say the same thing in more kind of conceptual areas, more philosophical areas, more, narrative, fictive, whatever, levels, when it comes to poetry, when it comes to fiction, right? And you see this emerging, right? In these two, like just these two stanzas, right? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. And, he doesn't like say that this is God, right? He assumes that perhaps this is going to be one of your thoughts, but you could have another thought. This could be, something as crazy as, I forget which book it was, but Lauren Isley has this idea that, can we ever really prove that we're not just like a bunch of, human beings on this planet that lives on like the tail of this huge beast, right? And we think of the tail as the universe as we know it now, but really it's this like wide, wide ranging beast. There is like an amorphous force here. It could be God, it could be God-like. But it's controlling, right? Till some blind hand. It's not a hand that's malicious. It's not malevolent. It's also not necessarily benign. It could be benign in the sense that it creates something, right? There's a nothing and now there's a something. So in that kind of like, I guess, demiurge way, is that the right demiurge? That's how you pronounce it. In the demiurge sense, like you have a creator, so like that's like a positive, but he does not ascribe morality here. This is sort of amoral. Till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the one of thought is death, then am I a happy fly if I live or if I die. So, and again, you could, no matter who you are, you can interpret this how you want, no matter what walk of life you want from, you come from. If you're a poet, if you're a writer like me, and you want to believe that he's talking about the want of thought is death, and that thought means the highest thought when you're writing, when you're reading, when you're engaging in the world, when you're thinking about poetry, when you're not ever your base self, you can interpret the poem that way. And hey, it makes sense because he's a poet and he's trying to find a new way to communicate. So that's a perfectly plausible interpretation. So if thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, you could just talk about it back in the generic sense of, hey, this fly, it's not just like, it's not simply that you're an animal like the fly, it's also a man like you are, right? And that fly's thought, as little as it seems to you, right, in a kind of deontological sense, I guess, in a deontological sense, that fly qualitatively has thoughts that are as important, right, and as privileged as yours. You could, you have many ways to interpret this, right? Just, and again, very simple, right? Very, jamming is very useful here. And, then am I a happy fly if I live or if I die? If you view this in this way, right, that that the highest, most aspirational thoughts are necessary, then essentially, you would be happy without thought, right? Because you're not an aspirational thinker in that sense. Like, you're not like a mass conceptualizer. You're not someone that takes pleasure from that. You're not someone that understands the world in that way. You're not someone that wants to engage in that world that way. This isn't a value judgment in any way. This is just a way of telling you that Blake forcefully opens up, different ways to interpret these kinds of statements. just to get every possible reader, every possible careful, nuanced, intelligent, thoughtful, whatever reader, right? That's always the caveat, right? It's not just a schmo, but it could be a schmo in some ways, right? It's definitely not an academic. Anyway, that's enough for Blake. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.